Sometimes the most important discoveries come when you least expect them. Sometimes life changes in the silence between one heartbeat and the next, when you're simply walking the same path you've walked 100 times before. Samuel Reed, a retired soldier, had spent his later years roaming the wild ridges of Appalachia. He knew every trail, every stream, every hollow where the fog lingered at dawn. His loyal German shepherd, Shadow, had been at his side for nearly a decade. But on this frosty morning, Shadow froze. His ears pricked, his muscles tensed. He stared through the trees at something Samuel had never seen before: an abandoned train car standing alone where no tracks had ever run. Its iron skin was rusted, tangled in vines, as if it had been sleeping here for decades. But that was impossible. Samuel knew these mountains better than anyone. Who could have hidden an entire train car here in the wilderness? And what terrifying secrets waited inside? The morning sun spilled warmly across the ridges of West Virginia's Appalachian Range, painting the trees in shades of deep green and gold. It was the kind of day hikers treasured: clear skies, crisp air, the scent of pine and fresh earth drifting on the breeze. Samuel Reed walked the narrow trail with the ease of a man who had long since memorized every curve of the land. At 44, he was still tall and broad-shouldered, his dark brown hair touched faintly with gray at the temples. A short, neat beard shadowed his jaw, his gray eyes sharp with vigilance born of old battlefields. Beside him padded Shadow, his 8-year-old German shepherd. The dog's sable and black coat gleamed in the sunlight, his body lean and muscular from years of roaming the mountains. Though age had touched the fur around his muzzle with streaks of white, Shadow moved with the disciplined grace of a soldier's companion. His ears twitched at every rustle, his nose tested every shifting scent, his presence a constant reassurance that Samuel was never truly alone. For Samuel, these mountains had become a refuge. He had traded the chaos of distant deserts for the quiet rhythm of the forest, living in a modest cabin, fishing from nearby streams, and wandering these trails with his only faithful partner. Yet even here, the war was never fully gone. It lived in his reflexes, in the way he read every shadow, in the dreams that sometimes drove him awake before dawn. They had walked this trail 100 times, the earth firm beneath their boots and paws. But today, something broke the pattern. Shadow halted abruptly, muscles tightening, ears thrust forward. A low growl rumbled from his chest, more warning than question. Samuel froze, his instincts flaring awake. His hand hovered near the revolver at his belt, though his eyes swept the trees before him. "What is it, boy?" he murmured. Shadow's gaze was locked ahead. Following it, Samuel spotted a shape half hidden beyond the thicket, a hulking silhouette that had no place here. He stepped forward slowly, parting the leaves, and the sight struck him silent. There, in the clearing, stood an old train car. Its metal was rusted, its surface overgrown with tangled vines, its windows shattered. Nature had tried to reclaim it, but the frame still stood heavy and defiant among the trees. Samuel's pulse quickened. He knew these mountains like the back of his hand. Every creek, every ridge. There had never been train tracks here. The impossibility of it tightened his chest. Shadow growled again, hackles rising, pressing closer against Samuel's leg. For the first time in years, Samuel saw hesitation in the dog that had once charged into gunfire. Without fear. The forest around them was quiet, almost unnaturally so. No birdsong, no wind in the branches, just the faint creak of rusted metal shifting under the sun. Samuel's gut told him this was no relic of forgotten history. This train car had a purpose, and whatever that purpose was, it wasn't innocent. He exhaled slowly, the weight of mystery settling on his shoulders like an old combat pack. He thought his wars were over, that the mountains would grant him peace. But peace had a way of hiding secrets. And in that moment, staring at the impossible iron carcass in the clearing, Samuel knew his fight wasn't finished. The sun had risen higher, casting shafts of golden light through the canopy, dappling the ground in shifting patterns. The forest should have felt alive, birds calling, insects buzzing, leaves whispering in the breeze. Instead, the clearing around the train car was thick with silence, as if even nature itself recoiled from the thing. Samuel moved cautiously, his boots crunching softly on dry twigs. Shadow pressed close to his leg. The closer he got, the more wrong it felt. The metal sides of the car bore streaks of rust, the iron eaten away by years of rain and sun. But the structure itself seemed stubbornly intact. Its heavy door was chained, though the links were corroded. Samuel reached out, his fingertips brushing cool iron. Then he tugged lightly. The hinges groaned, brittle and sharp, and the door gave way an inch. Dust poured from the gap like breath held for decades. Shadow growled again, the low rumble vibrating against Samuel's calf. The dog's ears were pinned forward, tail stiff, every nerve alive with tension. "Stay with me," Samuel muttered. He drew his flashlight from his pack, flicked it on, and shone it into the darkness. What he saw made his stomach twist. There were no passenger seats, no remnants of travel. The interior had been gutted, stripped bare. In their place were iron rings bolted into the floor and walls at precise intervals. Some still held scraps of rope or chain. The wooden panels bore deep scratches, claw marks gouged into the grain. Dark stains spread across planks where countless scrubbings had failed to erase them. The smell was foul, a mixture of mildew, iron, and something metallic that Samuel had known too many times before. Blood. Shadow refused to step inside. He planted his paws firmly at the threshold, barking once, sharp and insistent, then backing away. His tail lowered, his eyes locked on the shadows, as if warning Samuel that the air itself was poisoned. Samuel's chest tightened. This wasn't a relic. This wasn't abandonment. This was a cage. He forced himself inside, the floor creaking under his weight. His flashlight cut through the gloom, landing on a pile of forgotten debris in the corner. Kneeling, Samuel pulled out fragments of paper, brittle with age and water damage. His trained eye caught the faint printed lines, a passenger manifest. Many words were smeared, illegible, but he made out columns of names and destinations. Something cold ran down his spine. None of the destinations matched the local geography. The list spoke of faraway cities: New Orleans, Chicago, Dallas. Names from all across the country crammed into one impossible journey. And the date, barely legible but clear enough, read October 20th, 1989. Samuel's hand tightened around the page. He had been just a boy then, training for the service. Whatever happened here had been hidden for over 3 decades. The thought struck him with the force of memory. Briefings on covert transfers, rumors among soldiers about black projects. He'd dismissed them as campfire stories meant to keep rookies awake at night. But here, standing inside the rotting husk of a train car that had no right to exist, he knew the stories had roots. A faint sound made him stiffen, twigs snapping outside. He killed the flashlight, heart hammering, ears straining. Shadow growled again, low and steady. Samuel slid to the doorway, peering out into the clearing. For a long moment there was only silence and the rustle of leaves. Then nothing. Whoever or whatever had been there was gone. Samuel exhaled slowly. The forest felt heavier now, as though it pressed in around him. He folded the fragile paper carefully, sliding it into his pack. This was no longer curiosity. It was evidence. As he stepped back into the light, Shadow leaned against him, body trembling with restrained energy. Samuel rubbed the dog's head, his voice quiet. "You were right, boy. This place isn't just forgotten. It's hiding something, and someone wanted it to stay hidden." The breeze picked up, rattling the chains on the car's door. their clinking echoing like faint laughter. Samuel felt the weight of his old instincts settle firmly back onto his shoulders. He had thought he left his soldier's purpose behind, but now the mountain had handed him a mission, and missions always had enemies. The afternoon light filtered warmly through the canopy, throwing long shadows across Samuel's cabin porch. He sat at his worn wooden table, the fragment of the passenger manifest spread out carefully under a glass pane to keep the brittle edges from crumbling further. Shadow lay at his feet, chin on his paws, eyes open and alert, every so often flicking toward the window as if expecting someone to arrive uninvited. Samuel had read the list a dozen times already. 14 names, though several were barely legible: Alvarez, Singh, Nguyen, McCarthy. The diversity struck him immediately. These weren't random passengers on a forgotten rural line. These were people pulled from different corners of the country. And the destinations, New Orleans, Chicago, Dallas, Portland, formed no logical route. No train would ever have linked them all. His gut told him what his mind already knew. They weren't passengers. They were targets. He leaned back, memories tugging at him. In the early years of his service, when he was still green, rumors had circulated in whispers. There were programs the government never admitted, trains and planes that carried not soldiers or supplies, but people, witnesses, defectors, liabilities. The official story was always relocation, protection. But among the ranks, the darker version was that some never arrived at their destinations. Files were scrubbed, names erased, whole lives vanished. Samuel rubbed a hand across his face. He had dismissed those tales back then as paranoia, the kind of chatter that thrived in the lonely hours between patrols. But now, holding evidence 3 decades old, he realized those whispers had been closer to truth than anyone dared admit. Shadow raised his head suddenly, ears pricked. Samuel stiffened. Out on the dirt road leading to the cabin, dust rose in the distance. He slid the manifest quickly into a folder and set it beneath his jacket. By the time the truck pulled up, Shadow was already standing, hackles raised. The vehicle was an old blue pickup, familiar to Samuel. Sheriff Thomas Garrison stepped out, his frame broad beneath his leather jacket. At 45, he still carried himself with the authority of a man who knew every inch of these mountains. His blonde-brown hair, flecked with early gray, sat neatly under his worn Stetson. A trimmed mustache shadowed his upper lip, and his pale blue eyes were sharp, though weariness clung beneath them. "Reed," Garrison said, his voice low, almost wary. "We need to talk." Samuel didn't relax, not entirely, but he motioned toward the porch. The sheriff climbed the steps, his boots heavy on the boards, and took the seat across from him. Shadow sat between them, watching every movement with suspicion. "I heard you've been poking around the ridge," Garrison began. He removed his hat, running a hand through his hair. "And I heard about something you found." Samuel's jaw tightened. Word travels fast. "In a town this size, it always does," Garrison replied. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "Listen, Reed, I'm not here to scare you off, but I need to know exactly what you've seen." Samuel studied him, then slid the folder onto the table, opening it just enough to show the manifest. The sheriff's eyes narrowed as he read the faded lines. His fingers hovered over the names. "Damn," he muttered. "I knew it." "You knew what?" Samuel asked. Garrison looked up, his face hard, voice tight. "In 1989, my brother Mark was a deputy. He was on night patrol near Miller's Ridge. He told me he saw federal trucks, unmarked, heavy, with crates being moved under floodlights. Said it looked like a whole operation hidden in the canyon. He planned to report it. 2 days later, he fell into an abandoned mine shaft. His lips curled bitterly. At least, that's what the report said. They called it an accident. I've never believed it." The silence stretched. Samuel felt the pieces slotting together like a grim puzzle. "You think your brothers saw them moving this train?" Samuel asked quietly. Garrison's eyes hardened. "I don't think." "I know, and whatever killed him has been buried with official stamps for 30 years. Shadow growled softly, as if punctuating the truth. Samuel reached down to steady him. The sheriff straightened, squaring his shoulders. "I can't take this through channels." "Not yet. Too many strings pulled from the top. But if you're in this, we might have a chance to drag the truth into daylight." Samuel met his gaze. For years he had avoided getting pulled back into causes bigger than himself. But the faces on that manifest, their silent screams carved into the wood of that train car, left him no choice. "I'm in," Samuel said simply. Garrison nodded once, firmly, like a pact had been sealed. "Then we start with Miller's Ridge." That's where the trail went cold in '89. Maybe now it'll heat up again. The sun dipped lower, staining the trees in amber and fire. As Garrison left, Samuel stood at the edge of his porch, shadow pressing against his leg. He felt the old weight again, the call of duty. Only this time it wasn't a war in some foreign desert. It was here, in his mountains, buried under 30 years of lies. By late afternoon the mountains glowed in orange light, the air cooling as shadows stretched long across the ridges. Samuel lay low in a thicket of rhododendron, his rifle resting across his forearm, shadow pressed flat at his side. The dog's ears flicked, body rigid. Both master and animal were silent, breathing in unison, eyes fixed on the clearing below, where the rusted train car loomed like a scar. The crunch of tires broke the forest's hush. A black pickup rolled into view, its paint dulled, its license plate missing. The truck halted near the train car, engine idling. 3 men climbed out. Samuel recognized Marcus immediately, the broad frame, the unshaven jaw, the thick jacket straining at his shoulders. The second was the blond youth, pale and wiry, his movements jittery, eyes darting as though every shadow threatened him. Then came a man Samuel had not yet seen. He stepped from the driver's side with slow, deliberate authority. Taller than the others, perhaps 6 feet, shoulders squared, posture precise. His hair was dark, peppered lightly with gray, though he was no older than 45. A neatly trimmed beard framed sharp cheekbones, and his eyes, icy gray, piercing, devoid of warmth, swept the clearing like searchlights. This was no hired hand. This was a commander. The 3 men moved to the truck bed and dragged out a long duffel bag wrapped in plastic, its seams stretched taut. The blond man faltered, gagging as a foul stench leaked out. Marcus shoved him with a growl. "Keep moving." They hauled the bag inside the train car. Samuel tightened his grip on the rifle, his stomach knotting. He had carried bags like that before, on battlefields, zipped closed around men he had called brothers. The memory pressed against his ribs, but he forced his breath steady. Shadow whined faintly, ears flat, as though sensing the horror inside. Minutes later the men emerged, sweat on their brows despite the cool air. Marcus lit a cigarette, blowing smoke with careless irritation. The blond youth avoided looking at the train car. The gray-eyed stranger remained composed, his gaze sweeping once more across the tree line. For a heartbeat, Samuel felt those steel eyes rest directly on him. His pulse hammered, but he remained still, every muscle taut. At last the man turned away. A sharp command sent the group back to the truck. The engine roared, tires grinding into the soil, leaving behind tracks and the faint chemical scent of bleach. Within moments, the forest was quiet again. Samuel exhaled slowly, tension bleeding from his muscles. He glanced at Shadow, who trembled slightly but held his gaze with fierce loyalty. Samuel patted the dog's neck. "Good boy. We've seen enough." He crawled forward after a long silence, studying the evidence they left behind. Tire tracks stamped into the dirt, footprints leading in and out of the car, a smear of mud across the metal doorframe. The faint chemical odor lingered strongest near the entrance. He didn't step inside this time. The image of that duffel bag sliding into the shadows was enough. Instead, he took notes, recording the details in the battered notebook he carried since his Army days. He wrote quickly. Marcus, muscle, blonde, hesitant, gray-eyed leader, calm, dangerous, commands obedience. Evidence, bleach smell, bag-likely body. When the sun dipped fully and the first stars began to pierce the sky, Samuel melted back into the trees, Shadow trotting at his side. The mountains no longer felt like sanctuary. They felt like a battlefield waiting for orders. He knew two things with certainty. The train car was not a relic of the past. It was still in use. And the pale-eyed man leading the operation would not stop until every witness, every thread of truth, was cut away. Samuel had faced men like him before, ruthless, patient, dangerous. But they all had one weakness. They believed no one was watching. This time, Samuel was. The next morning broke clear and sharp, sunlight pouring through Samuel's cabin window. He sat at his table, Shadow stretched nearby, the battered notebook open before him. The words he had written the night before, Marcus, blond youth, gray-eyed leader, stared back like a grim roster. He knew the truth now. The train car wasn't just an artifact of the past. It was still active. He picked up the phone, its cord stretched tight, and dialed a number he hadn't touched in years. The line clicked after 3 rings. "Reed," a voice said, low and gravelly. "I'll be damned." "Thought you swore off calling old ghosts. Hello, Ramirez," Samuel answered. Victor Ramirez, 44, had once been his sergeant overseas. Built like a brawler, his thick shoulders strained against even casual jackets, and his hair, black cut short with faint silver threads at the temples, gave him an air of earned authority. A thin scar ran across his neck, pale against tanned skin, a reminder of a night ambush years ago. His eyes, dark and unrelenting, marked him as a man who had seen too much and refused to forget. Now he wore the badge of an FBI agent, though his methods often pushed the boundaries of protocol. "You wouldn't be calling unless it was serious," Ramirez continued. Samuel told him everything, the rusted car, the steel rings, the claw marks, the list of names dated October 1989. He described Marcus and the blond youth, then the pale-eyed man who commanded with a glance. Silence stretched on the line before Ramirez spoke again. "Damn it, I thought Iron Haven was dead." Samuel frowned. "Iron Haven?" Ramirez exhaled audibly. "A program the Bureau never admits existed, late 80s. They called it a haven for federal witnesses, hidden relocations, off-the-books transfers, supposedly ironclad protection. But in 1989, one of the convoys vanished. The official report said train derailment in a Kentucky canyon. No wreckage ever found, no bodies, just paperwork stamped closed. And you believe it wasn't an accident? I know it wasn't," Ramirez snapped. Files disappeared, names erased. It stank of a cover-up. And if you've found that train car, then Iron Haven wasn't destroyed. It was hijacked. Someone turned a witness protection program into a prison. Samuel's jaw tightened. And those men last night? They're keeping it alive. Which means witnesses weren't protected. They were eliminated. A knock at the door cut through the conversation. Shadow barked sharply, rushing to the window. Samuel moved quickly, pulling the curtain aside. Sheriff Thomas Garrison stood on the porch, hat in hand, his pale blue eyes grave. "Vic," Samuel said into the phone, "I've got company." "Careful who you trust," Ramirez warned. "Call me back when you can." The line went dead. Samuel opened the door. "Sheriff." Garrison stepped inside, his boots leaving dust on the floorboards. He removed his hat, twisting it slowly in his hands. "I heard trucks moving up by Miller's Ridge again." "Same black pickup you described." He hesitated, then added, "This isn't the first time I've seen them." "I've kept quiet too long." Samuel motioned him to the table. The sheriff sat heavily, his leather jacket creaking, his face hardening as if dragging up old wounds. "In '89, Garrison said, "my brother Mark was on patrol. He saw unmarked federal trucks hauling crates into the canyon. He told me it didn't look like wreckage. It looked like an operation. He was going to report it." 2 days later, they found him in a mine shaft, broken neck. They called it an accident. His lips curled bitterly. "I was 50. I've been waiting 30 years for the truth." Samuel studied him. The pain behind Garrison's pale eyes was raw, but so was the steel. This wasn't just duty for him. It was personal. "You think it's tied to Iron Haven," Samuel said. "I don't think," Garrison growled. "I know. And I'll help you prove it." Shadow whined softly, pacing near the door, as if already sensing unseen watchers. Outside, the hum of an engine echoed faintly down the road. A dark sedan rolled slowly past the cabin, windows tinted, never slowing. Samuel and Garrison both turned toward it, silent. "They're watching," Garrison muttered. Samuel's gray eyes hardened. "Then let's give them something worth watching." The forest lay cloaked in darkness, the moon hanging low over the ridges of Appalachia. Stars glimmered faintly between drifting clouds, casting just enough light to etch the outlines of the trees. Samuel Reed crouched behind a mossy boulder, rifle steady, shadow pressed tight against his leg. The German shepherd's body was taut, his breath quick puffs of mist in the chill. Samuel's pulse was steady, his soldier's mind sliding back into the rhythm of anticipation. Beside him, Victor Ramirez checked his watch, the dim red glow reflecting off the scar at his neck. At 44, his frame was still imposing, his shoulders filling the dark tactical jacket he wore. His voice, low but controlled, carried through the earpiece. "We're in position." We wait for the handoff. Sheriff Thomas Garrison, 45, lay prone further along the ridge, his hunting rifle trained on the clearing below. The pale blue of his eyes was hidden now behind the scope, but his steady breathing spoke of a man who had waited decades for this moment. Further out were 2 more allies. Caleb Hines, 43, tall and wiry, his ginger hair cut close, his sharp green eyes constantly flicking between his pack of charges and the clearing. A former demolitions expert, his hands moved with quick efficiency, setting countermeasures in case the network planned to detonate. His face was grim, haunted by past blasts that had claimed his comrades. With him was Lena Moore, 36, slim and tall, her chestnut hair pulled tight into a braid. Her hazel eyes, cool and calculating, flicked across the terrain as she scanned with her binoculars. The black tactical vest hugged her lean frame, but her movements were fluid, calm, precise. She spoke softly into her comm. 2 vehicles inbound. ETA 3 minutes. The growl of engines soon cut through the night. First came the black pickup, then a dark SUV. Both killed their headlights before rolling into the clearing. Men climbed out, 6 in total. Marcus was there, thick-set and scowling. The blond youth stumbled as he carried gear, earning a shove from his partner. Then came the gray-eyed leader, tall, around 45, his long, dark coat flowing as he stepped into the clearing. Jonathan Hale. His cold steel eyes scanned the tree line, calm, unflinching. The SUV's rear doors opened. 4 captives were dragged out, 2 men, 2 women, gagged and bound. One man wore a suit, his hair graying, eyes wide with fear. A young woman with curly black hair met the pale-eyed man's gaze with defiance, even through her restraints. They were shoved toward the train car, their steps clumsy, muffled cries swallowed by the night. Marcus barked orders. Crates were hauled out. Samuel recognized detonator rigs, wires, bundled explosives. Caleb muttered into his comm, "They're rigging the car." Just like I thought. His hands gripped his countercharges tighter. "Wait for the mark," Ramirez whispered. Samuel's eyes stayed locked on Hale, who stood like a conductor overseeing a macabre symphony. For the first time, Samuel felt the heat of fury rise through his chest. He had seen leaders like this before, calculating, ruthless, untouchable. But tonight, he was not untouchable. The captives were pushed inside. The men began wiring the charges. Ramirez's voice crackled, "Now!" The forest erupted. A flashbang burst with blinding light, Caleb's throw perfect. Gunfire cracked sharp and violent. Ramirez's rifle spat fire, cutting down a guard near the SUV. Garrison fired from the ridge, his bullet tearing through another. Samuel moved as he had 100 times before. He advanced, rifle steady, shadow launching forward like a missile. The shepherd hit a gunman square in the chest, dragging him down, teeth flashing. Samuel fired twice, covering the dog, each shot precise. Marcus roared, returning fire wildly. The blond youth froze, panic locking his limbs, his rifle hanging useless. Hale, calm amid chaos, signaled toward the detonators. One man lunged for the wires, but Caleb was already there, sliding into the clearing, cutting through circuits, jamming his countercharge. Sparks flew, but the line went dead. Caleb's jaw was clenched tight, his eyes fierce. Lena dashed across the clearing, low and swift, reaching the captives. With a flick of her knife, she cut bonds, her voice urgent but steady. "Move! Crawl toward the tree line." The young woman nodded, pulling the others with her, their muffled cries turning into desperate gasps for freedom. Shadow snarled, his muzzle bloodied, dragging down another attacker before Samuel's bullet finished the fight. Ramirez advanced with methodical precision, every burst of his rifle pushing the enemy back. Then Samuel saw him, Hale raising his pistol, eyes locking with his across the chaos. They fired nearly in unison. Hale's shot grazed Samuel's shoulder, spinning him slightly, but Samuel's round struck close, forcing Hale to stumble back. Shadow lunged toward him, teeth bared, but Hale vanished into the tree line, slipping into darkness like smoke. The gunfire ebbed, leaving silence broken only by ragged breathing. Marcus lay bleeding, cursing weakly. The blond youth dropped his weapon, hands shaking, whispering, "I didn't sign up for this," before collapsing in surrender. The captives, free now, clung to each other near Lena. Caleb wiped sweat from his brow, nodding at the disarmed explosives. "All dead." "They won't light this fuse tonight." Ramirez knelt beside Samuel, checking the wound. "Through the shoulder. You'll live." Samuel gritted his teeth, patting Shadow's neck. The shepherd panted heavily, fur matted, eyes still sharp. The clearing was theirs. The train car still stood, its iron walls scarred but silent. For the first time in decades, it had failed to consume lives. But Samuel knew this was only one battle. Hale had escaped, and men like him never surrendered. Tonight was survival. Tomorrow would be war. Charleston's federal courthouse towered white and solemn against a clear autumn sky, the steps lined with reporters, family members, and silent onlookers who had waited decades for this day. Samuel Reed stood apart from the crowd, his broad frame straight despite the dull ache in his shoulder where Hale's bullet had grazed him weeks earlier. Shadow sat loyally at his side, ears alert, sable fur gleaming in the sun, his steady presence grounding Samuel in the midst of turmoil. The case had grown into a storm, sweeping across the country. documents salvaged from the train car, the manifest of 1989, the testimony of rescued captives, and the confessions dragged out of Marcus and the trembling blond youth had all converged into an ironclad case. Ramirez had worked night and day, his scarred voice carrying authority on the witness stand. Garrison testified, his pale blue eyes hard with grief as he recounted the death of his brother and the decades of silence. Caleb presented the disabled explosives as evidence, while Lena's detailed surveillance logs painted a picture of a network too careful to be chance. Inside the courtroom, the names of those accused rang like thunder: senior officials, former marshals, judges, and agents who had buried the truth under false reports. And looming above it all was Jonathan Hale, though absent, still hunted, still free. His shadow hung heavy over every testimony. Samuel had taken the stand only once. He had spoken plainly, without flourish, his gravel voice recounting the night in the clearing, the smell of bleach, the duffel bag, the steel rings bolted into the train car. His gray eyes had locked on the jurors. It wasn't a prison of the past. It was still in use, and people died because no one stopped it. His words needed no embellishment. When the verdict came, the air seemed to hold its breath. Guilty, guilty, guilty. One after another, the verdicts tolled like a bell of reckoning. In the gallery, families wept openly. Sarah Chen, a tall woman in her 40s with black hair streaked with gray, clutched the hand of her elderly mother as tears ran down her face. The widow of a man named Singh sobbed quietly into her daughter's shoulder. Decades of silence broke at last. Outside, the Deputy Attorney General spoke to the press. Justice delayed is not justice denied. Today, after 34 years, the truth has been brought into the light. No network of corruption is too vast to escape accountability. Samuel didn't linger among the microphones or cameras. He remained at the courthouse steps, shadow pressed against his leg. He watched as Sarah Chen approached, her eyes red, but her voice steady. "Thank you," she whispered. "You gave us back the truth. That's more than we ever hoped for." Samuel nodded once, unable to summon words, but his eyes softened. As the crowd thinned, he found Ramirez leaning against a pillar, his dark eyes tired but burning with satisfaction. Garrison stood. Nearby, shoulders heavy but freer than Samuel had ever seen him. Caleb smoked a cigarette quietly, his hands shaking just slightly, while Lena scribbled in her notebook, already preparing reports. They had fought together not just as soldiers, but as guardians of memory. Samuel turned his gaze upward. The sky stretched vast and blue above Charleston, unmarred by shadows. For the first time in years, the burden he carried eased. He reached down, scratching behind Shadow's ear. The shepherd leaned into his hand, tail thumping once against the marble step. He knew battles never truly ended. Hale was still out there, and darkness would always seek corners to hide in. But for now, justice had been restored, and that was enough. Samuel Reed, soldier no longer, simply a man, stood with his dog at his side and felt, perhaps for the first time since leaving the war, that peace was not a dream, but a truth worth fighting for. Sometimes justice feels delayed, buried under decades of silence. Yet, like a seed hidden deep in the soil, truth has a way of breaking through when the time is right. And perhaps that, too, is a kind of miracle, a reminder that God's hand moves even when we cannot see it. Samuel and Shadow discovered more than an abandoned train. They found proof that light still rises against the darkest of secrets. In our own daily lives, we may not face hidden networks or forgotten crimes, but we all carry battles, burdens, and silent hopes. And just as Samuel stood firm with only his courage and his faithful companion, we too are never alone, for God walks beside us, often in ways we only understand later. If this story touched your heart, I invite you to share it, leave a comment with your thoughts, and subscribe to our channel for more soul-stirring tales. May the Lord bless you and your loved ones, granting you strength, peace, and the quiet miracle of hope that never fades.